Hello, thank you for joining my virtual webinar. I hope you're having a great conference. I wish I could be there with you. My name is Norman Owens. I'm a senior solution architect at AWS. I've been here almost 2 years now. I focus on the state of Minnesota in the United States as a single customer. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to be able to walk you through our reference architecture that an AWS team that we built, and I'll walk you through some of the design considerations and services. So the opportunity that presented itself was, an AWS customer saying, "Hey, I like this Open EDX, but we're a government entity. We potentially want to reach all the citizens in our area. How do we scale this to hundreds of thousands?" Now, you may not be looking at scaling to hundreds of thousands, but this reference architecture can provide you with a start point to look at scaling where it makes most sense to you and how to do it, regardless of size. We want to optimize cost, of course, and we want to maximize availability by removing single points of failure, because any outage, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of users, has reputational damage. And aligned to the Open EDX philosophy of let's let instructors and students focus on learning and teaching and content and not have to manage infrastructure underneath that. Let's give that to the IT staff and help them do it well. So I've offered this link. If you follow this link, it'll bring you to an AWS page, and if you do a search there for OpenEDX, you'll see this page of the architecture that we're going to go through. I won't go through all of the annotations that we've got here, but you can look at this as a guide to which services fit in to which layers and what were some of the decisions we made on those. So let's dive in. On the front end services, we quickly focused on Amazon Route 53, a global DNS service. The reason that was important is that your students and learners are potentially all over the world, and you don't want someone having a poor experience because they have to drag content across the world at slow speeds. So the Route 53 points to the Amazon CloudFront service, our content delivery network, where we have points of presence at hundreds of places all over the world. And when a student comes in and asks for content, Route 53 is able to determine what is the closest point of presence for the Amazon CloudFront, so that we can get that content to them with reduced latency. Because it's proximate to where they are. We also added in the AWS certificate manager because we recognize sometimes a single point of failure is the person who forgot to renew a certificate. So stop relying on people emails and use the certificate manager to automate that. On scaling considerations, you'll see a little bit of a pattern that I'll walk through. So we start with the AWS load balancer. It provides SSL termination and HTTPS termination. And what's significant there is it can scale to as big as you need, but you don't have to worry about any infrastructure underneath it because AWS provides that as a service. You also notice, looking at the layers here, I'll call out the auto scaling group. So in each case where there was a particular application that OpenEDX used in their logical architecture, we isolated that to a layer and implemented that application on servers. In the case of AWS, the Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, the EC2 instances are those servers. Within an auto scaling group, you can set the metrics that say how quickly it grows, adds new EC2 instances when demand is rising, and then how it scales back. So that gives you the scale without having to manually sort of figure that out or try and provision to your peak. So something that application load balancer is then told by the auto scaling group, hey, here's the number of nodes we've got right now, so that the load can keep being distributed, and as your peak begins to decline, let's shut down some of those EC2 instances so you pay for only what you need. I also have a AWS network load balancer for a very particular purpose. So we needed something at layer 7 to be able to identify which of this incoming traffic is a read statement to the proxy SQL database versus a write statement. And we put that in there because, as you probably know or recognize, reads are 10 times the number of writes usually, or even a greater ratio. So the way that we scale that database is to say, okay, we're going to size the write database. All the writes are going to go to that one authoritative database, which will replicate reads. And so now as peak goes up, in this context, peak is usually a lot of reads, right? So now you can scale that database to the number of reads that you need for your incoming traffic, and grow that as your student body grows as well. On the data service design, we began this in May of last year, and at that time, OpenEDX was not compatible with the Amazon DocumentDB, but stay tuned, that could change. So we used MongoDB, and you'll see here at the top, MongoDB best practices are 3 nodes across 3 availability zones, and you can scale that as well. But it's not covered within the auto-scaling group. Currently, the OpenEDX uses Elasticache for Redis, for Celery tasks, and Elasticache Memcache for the Django caching. We imagine that as you sort of develop and work this out, you could pick either or, but we followed the EDS logical architecture and put both of these layers in. And then the Amazon Elasticsearch service is a simple, quick, easy way to provide the OpenEDX search on the course catalog and catalog discovery. On the communication and storage, the Amazon Simple Email service is a very light service to provide student notifications via OpenEDX, the SMTP email integration. So we've included that. And most importantly, the Amazon Simple Storage service, it's one of the oldest services in AWS. And it grows and shrinks as you need it. So you pay only for the data that is on that S3 service. So you don't have to worry about scaling it to grow it or buy extra capacity. You only pay for the data that lands there. And with that comes the ability to manage your data to lifecycle management policies. So for instance, if you've got a professor who puts things, uses a course once every year or two, let's move that content into a lower cost EC2 Glacier to lower cost, and then bring it back out as needed. Now, a couple of other design considerations. We see at the top layer here, we do have a Bastion host. We don't recommend the usage of a Bastion host, but we recognize that many of you may be still running in data centers and using Bastion host to jump into particular services. We look at it as a potential security issue, and what we offer instead and recommend is, start managing the patterns that manage this server. Don't go in and try and change a server, and you'll see over time that with that philosophy in mind, you use the Bastion host less and less. We weren't able to get this to work with our Graviton 2 instances. Still working on that, more to come there, but our Graviton 2 EC2 instances are less expensive and run faster. And this is a server-based OpenEDX reference architecture. As you're aware, you'll discover more in the conference, the OpenEDX has a container-based architecture, but this may be the right architecture for where your organization is. I know I've run over a little time a little bit, but reach out to me for any questions you have. Here's my contact information, and let's connect on network, and let's connect on LinkedIn and network too. Thank you very much. Sorry I went over a little.
name is Dave Ormsby. I'm a software architect at the Center for Reimagining Learning. And this lightning talk is Yikes! Handling changes to live content as a developer. So here's the problem in a nutshell. Hi, my name is Dave Ormsby. I'm a software architect at the Center for Reimagining Learning. And this lightning talk is Yikes! Handling changes to live content as a developer. So here's the problem in a nutshell. The course team has created some amazing piece of content, and that is stored in the module store, which is backed by MongoDB. You create an application, and in this app, you store the fact that a particular user likes a particular piece of content. And the way you store that is in your tables, in your models, you create a user ID, and you also create a usage key to track the piece of content. Now, this is not a foreign key to another table. Remember that the actual content data is stored in an entirely different database in MongoDB. But you store the usage key, which is a unique key that you can fetch that data from. And when you need to create the message, user Eddie likes unit of amazing content, you do a query to the module store in order to get that title information, which is great. It works fine until the course team deletes that unit of amazing content for whatever reason. Then suddenly you are left with the references to that data, but as soon as you try to query for it, your application explodes. This happens quite a lot, actually, especially when people are starting development of extensions to the system. And it's because we're not really accustomed to thinking about course content as something that can change out from underneath us. But this is very much the case. So how do we handle this? The default is, of course, to do nothing at all. And that will work for some amount of time until it doesn't. And you can get server errors, you can get state corruption, and all kinds of other issues. And so let's look at some things we can do to actually address the issue. But let's look at some motivating examples. So here's an example issue where we have saved the position, the user's position in the sequence. They are in the 4th unit of the sequence. And then the course team updates the sequence to have only 3 positions. Now, a solution for this is to simply delete incompatible state at runtime. And this is the solution you would go to when the stored state isn't that valuable, and also when there are sensible states. So in the case of this particular scenario, if the user gets reset to the beginning of the sequence, it doesn't matter. They can just click on where they want to pick up. And the key here is don't get fancy. Right? Whenever you start thinking of situations in which you might be able to reconcile the state and what's the right behavior, ask yourself, does the state really matter that much? Can we just reset them to the default beginning state and let the user pick it up? If you can do so, it will simplify your code and will remove more headaches down the road. Also, another piece of advice, store usage keys instead of offsets. If this position had been stored as a usage key of a unit there, you would still have to deal with the situation where that usage key disappeared, but it would be more resilient to adding more content inside the sequence, for instance. Next example issue is when you have a missing problem part. Say the course team put out a problem, it has 2 parts. A bunch of people answered this problem, but then the course team removed the second part of the problem. So what do we do here? A solution we can use is to ignore the incompatible state at runtime, because we don't want to delete that state, right? That state is actually valuable. We don't want to, if a bunch of students put answers for part 2, we don't want to wipe that out, especially because that content could have been changed in error. It could have been the course team just accidentally imported an old version of it. Maybe they just, made a mistake on the page and deleted something that they didn't intend to, and maybe they'll put it back very shortly thereafter. You don't want to kick off a change that deletes the answers for thousands of students because the course team happened to make a small mistake. Also, you can consider this option when you want to use a read replica. So in a situation where you can't actually make writes to the database. Main piece of advice here, encapsulate data access. This is generally a good piece of advice, but is especially valuable here so that you can put all your failure handling logic in one place. Next example, course team error requires rescoring. So in this case, the course team has put out a problem that has been misconfigured. A bunch of people answered it. They gave the right answer, but they were marked incorrect. So the solution here is to provide an async mechanism for state correction. Basically, to provide like a celery task or a management command that's going to go and it's going to fix a bunch of records in the database all at once. Uh, this is an option to consider, especially if your state correction is complicated, such that you actually have to make the user has to make some upfront decisions about how that state should be corrected. For instance, in this scenario, the course team might decide that, uh, yes, we want to make sure that you are given full credit if you had answered it correctly and our mistake marked you wrong. But if our mistake caused you to be graded to get a better score, we don't want to take back that grade just because of our mistake, right? It's so they might check the option that says yes, rescore the students, but never lower their score. So that if in any case, if you're looking to do this kind of thing, please consider the Django user task framework. It is a library that edX developed. I believe Jeremy Bowman was one of the primary authors of that. And this will make this sort of task much easier for you. Another example is changing assessment rubrics. So let's say we have an open response assessment problem. This is a peer grading sort of problem. And the rubric says, okay, if the answer uses Acme products that test 10 points, they fall off a cliff, it's 5 points. And 2 assessments are made for student answers using this rubric. But then the rubric changes. The course team decides actually falling off a cliff should be worth 10 points. And 3 more assessments are made under the second rubric. Now, this is important because you can't mix these 2 rubrics. Right? You have to give them a score, but it has to be a consistent one. And you can't, like taking the median of 5 assessments made against 2 separate rubrics is not a meaningful number. So in this case, a solution is to make defensive copies. Like this is an option to consider when the state at a given point in time is really important. So what the assessment was at the time, or which rubric the assessment was made against, matters. But this is not something that's necessarily user-facing. User is not really necessarily being shown like that these different rubrics exist. It's also important. It's also very useful for when you want to extract bits of data like titles. Like in the original example that I gave at the very beginning of this talk, you might want to just grab title information so that you can have it locally and not have to reach into Module Store for it. And this is especially important if you're giving like a list of items for which Module Store access would be very inefficient. So advice here, there is a course publish signal. You want to listen to that and transform the data from the publish process, from the Module Store to whatever form you need it in your models. So again, our last example is talking about course content and its relation to content libraries. So in the course, you might have a problem that comes from a content library. And it's coming from a specific version in that content library. And then the content that content is updated. There's a new version of the library, new version of that problem. What do you do? So for this, we opted to do explicit versioning. And this is, I think, the path that you want to go to when version awareness is a core part of the user experience. When a course team looks at that library content problem inside their course, it's going to say, hey, the library has been updated. Do you want to grab the latest version of this? And there are very good reasons why the answer might be no. The course team, maybe the course has ended and they don't need to do the update. Maybe the course is on its last day of its final exam and they know that everything's working fine and they don't want to take the risk right now. So in either case, this is the most complicated of the options. And you have to think very carefully about who edits and publishes what and when, and the differing life cycles of these things. Finally, it should be easier. We should have abstractions for this that handle some of the interesting problems around versioning that make sure the content just doesn't disappear from under you without notifying your application. And those are major goals for the learning core data model. But that doesn't exist yet. So this is what you should. This is to help you get along until we can manage to figure that out. All right, and that's it. If you have any questions about this, please send me an email, find me on Slack, or in the forums. All right, take care.
Okay, next up we have Allison and Julia.
Hey everyone, we're going to be talking a bit about increasing access to external LMS content using the Common Cartridge tool, also known as the CC2 OLX tool. And it's presented by myself. My name's Julia Song. I'm a senior integration specialist. I've been with edX2U for a little over 4 years, and currently I work mostly on master's enrollments and programs admin.
And my name is Allie Langston. I'm a software engineer too at TU/edX, and I've been there for about 2 years. I'm on the program admin squad, so we do things related to proctoring, identity verification, and program enrollments.
So quick look at our short agenda. We're going to talk a bit about the background of the tool, technical components of the tool, and then we'll talk a bit about our pilot program, which we're able to determine content conversion, supported problem types, technical challenges, and then some things to consider after conversion using the tool. So for a little background on the tool, at edX we would have hackathons a few times a year, and for many years before, course teams would always ask us about an easier way to transfer content from another LMS platform to Studio. So in 2019 at one of the hackathons, the CC2 OLX tool started out as an idea, and then in 2020 we worked with OpenCraft to build out that tool as a blended development project. 2021 we were able to conduct a pilot program with about 10 courses from our partners and determine content conversion success. And then 2022 and ongoing, continued learning from us. We'd like to ask all you folks in the community to contribute as well.
Yeah, so the tool itself can be found on GitHub in the CC2OLX repo. And I'm going to go over a couple of the components that are found in that place. The first of which is the converter, and then some supplementary tools which are really creatively named, the video download and video upload tools. So as I mentioned, the converter is the main piece, and this is a CC2OLX tool. Its job is to convert a course that's in IMSCC file format. IMSCC is a type of content format defined by IMS Global, and some LMSs export to that content type or content format. So the converter converts from IMSCC to OLX, which can then be digested by edX. It's a command line tool, pretty straightforward to use. The requirements are listed here. There really aren't many. And then the expected output, of course, is that zip file containing the OLX, which can then be imported into Studio. And as I mentioned, also there are 2 video tools that were built out to support video conversion. So these require course catalog API credentials in order to use them. And the whole reason that we built them is that when we were going through the process of working on this tool, we found that the IMSCC formatted courses had embedded videos. They were just a video in an iframe. And when we ran that through the converter, it was a video in an iframe, which is all fine and good, but it didn't meet our accessibility standards at edX. So we needed a way to turn all of those iframe videos into a video X block. So in order to do that, we created the video download and video upload tools. So the video download tool really just parses through that IMSCC formatted file, finds all of the embedded video links, and then downloads them using YouTube DL. Right now there's only support for the download of Kaltura and YouTube videos, but because it's using YouTube DL, you can really build that out to support many other types of videos as well. Once you have those downloaded videos, you can then make use of the video upload tool, which uses the course catalog API to upload all of the videos for a given course to the course shell on Studio. The output of this tool is needed during the conversion step to actually convert those embedded video links to a video XBlock. And again, if those embedded videos are fine in an iframe, you don't need these steps, but if you want video XBlocks, you have to walk through these. And this is just an example usage of chaining those tools together. This is being recorded, I believe, so you can refer to these later. But yeah, it's the video download tool first to get all those video files. Then you can use the video upload tool to upload them, and then finally run the converter to get your converted course with the converted XBlock videos along with the other converted content types.
Yeah, so a little bit more about our pilot program. We had 10 courses involved, and we didn't have access to the native LMS platforms during the pilot program, so we would make use of a web browser, common cartridge viewer, and you can use this yourself as well. I believe we've added the link in this slide, so we can send it out afterwards. But the common cartridge viewer is on the left, so you're able to see a host of different assignment types and content types that you'd expect to be converted. And there are 2 points of conversion during export. So the first is from the native LMS platform to the IMSCC, and then the second point of conversion is IMSCC to OLX using the CC2 OLX tool. So using this web browser was a great way for us to get a gauge of what content was successful in that initial point of conversion and what we would expect to convert to OLX. And then here are just some screenshots. On the left-hand side, we see is a screenshot of the common cartridge viewer, and then on the right-hand side is the same course viewed in Studio.
Yeah, and this is just another look at the converted content types. This is an actual problem. So on the left-hand side, you can see a discussion type problem in the common cartridge viewer. There's some text, images, and then on the right-hand side, you can see the same thing on edX. So same text, same images, and then the problem type actually at the bottom. This one was longer, so I had to cut it up into 2 pieces.
So back to a little bit on our pilot program, we had 4 different LMS platforms participate. We only had 1 course each from Moodle, Brightspace, and Blackboard, so we'd really encourage you folks to try some more LMS platforms if you can. We had 7 courses from Canvas, and we had the most success and data for content conversions from Canvas. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about what content types we'd expect to convert using Canvas. For Moodle, Brightspace, and Blackboard, the initial conversion from the platform to IMSCC was not successful, so we wouldn't expect much content to convert in the second point of conversion using the CC2 OLX tool either. So for Canvas, we see there's a lot of things in the green. There's a lot of supported content types. However, Canvas did have a lot of upload assignments, so those are native to Canvas, and we would not expect them to convert into Studio. So you'd have to recreate all of those upload assignments once the course is in Studio. There's also not a match for the pattern match problem type in Studio, so those would have to be recreated as well.
Yeah, so some of the technical challenges that were encountered during the development and pilot program for this was, as Julia noted, there's varying success in the export of content to IMSCC format. We also found that the structure of content depth differs across different LMSs. So in edX, we have sections, subsections, and units. That's 3, but in other LMSs, that could vary, and there could be more levels, so it's a little bit difficult to translate that during the conversion. We also found that different LMSs had specific common cartridge extensions. So when the converter was being built, those had to be accounted for just to make sure that the content was converted successfully.
So although the tool is really helpful with ease of transferring content, there are still some considerations we'd recommend for afterwards. Conservatively, we'd estimate that this tool saves you about 20% of the time that it would normally take you to create a course from scratch. So let's say your course team takes about 5 weeks to create a course normally from scratch in Studio. We'd estimate that using this tool, you'd still need to set aside about 4 weeks to go over all of these considerations that you would normally set up for a course. So things like making sure the course start and end dates are correct, updating all of the Aura settings, adding your staff into Studio. So those would all have to be reviewed before the course is live. Another piece of feedback we received from our partners is that although this was really great for ease of content transition, it was harder for new course team members to onboard onto Studio. So when they had to troubleshoot any issues that came up later on, it was a lot harder than if they had already gone through the process to create the course from scratch in the first place. So we recommend that if you do make use of this tool, that you still onboard your full team onto Studio as you normally would.
Yeah, so with that, we'd love if everyone could come contribute to this. We know that the more courses that are tested out, the more improvements that we can make. That may mean supporting additional content types, smoothing out any of the formatting, and also being able to support any of the other LMSs. So if people are interested, please try it out. If you notice anything wrong, make a PR, and we can work together to try and add to this. I also really want to thank OpenCraft and specifically Josh for the work that was done on this as well. Thank you.
So I would like to do this because you can go out of. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just use the browser thing. Oh, okay. So are we in the browser now? Yeah. So I would like to use this if it's. And then is this being shared now or? Okay. Ah, okay. So I think we need to move the window. Can you move this window?
Can I close this one?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Of course. No. Let's. Yeah. I need this, and then I think we need to move this window onto the main screen, right?
Okay, if you need both, then both.
So this one, I don't know, it's not projecting.
Yeah.
The slide itself.
We need everything to be on one screen.
Okay.
Everything, right? Yes. Yeah. So it's fun.
In the meantime, can you guys hear me okay? Or is the... What's that? It is. He might just need to turn it up. Alright, so this is going to be on Zoom, and then I have my notes here. Okay. But we just need to...
Oh, not yet. Oh, okay. Yep. Oh, obviously. That one, he needs his presenter notes as well.
Yeah, exactly. I need this one. I need here. Yeah, the other thing can be full screened or maximized, I guess.
It can't be.
It can't be.
It's going to be on Zoom maximum. Here not. Yeah,
Ah.
on Zoom. But we can, but you can choose the Zoom feed.
Yeah, because yeah.
Can you choose the Zoom feed or what's being projected? Yeah. Okay, so let's do that.
We'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Okay, we're good.
No.
But he needs to do a spreadsheet there.
Ah, okay.
Objectives, correct?
Is it easier with the PowerPoint file? Because that's also on there, right?
But do you have the notes on your PowerPoint?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I did an export, and so
Yes. We need to use the PowerPoint or it will not be
it's
a problem.
yeah. Okay, then just switch to the PowerPoint one.
It's better.
Looks like it, yeah.
Where is the PowerPoint?
It's on the desktop. There's a, or I think it's already open, probably. No?
No, go to the
There's a folder there. Lightning talks. Yeah, and then there's the PPTX. I can use that one.
But he will need to see the notes. You don't have your notes on the notes are in here.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, present your notes. So you could write your notes when you do this, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like this, it's fine. I can see him here. Yes.
Yeah, and that'll work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, because you can write your notes here and
That's what I did.
you're gonna do that. Oh, okay, okay. No, he has the notes on.
All right. Yay. Okay. So, hello everyone. It's nice to see you all. My name is Tim, and I'm going to be talking to you today about addressing distraction. And so we all have access to trillions of gigabytes of information almost any time and anywhere. And we love it, right? Because we can find out almost anything just by typing a few keywords into Google. But this overabundance of information can also be overwhelming. And it's not a new thing. So in fact, all the way back in 1971, there was a social scientist who said that a wealth of information will create a poverty of attention. And so this was 12 years before the internet was born, and like multiple decades before things like Netflix and TikTok came along. So it's probably safe to say that this problem hasn't gone away since then. So what do we do about it? How can we become more focused and productive again? Well, we start by acknowledging that distraction is really inevitable. There's no off switch, and so what's important is actually how we deal with it. And there's luckily a few strategies that we can use to reduce the potential for distraction. And some of those are more high level, and you don't need to necessarily work on them every single day. And others are more like daily practices. And I'll start with the high level strategies. So first one is to get to know yourself as a learner. You essentially want to ask yourself, under what conditions do you learn best? For example, you can ask yourself, do you prefer a more quiet environment, or maybe some white noise, or even music? Do you get easily distracted if your workspace is really messy? And then based on the answers to these types of questions, you'll want to create your setup to match. And the specifics are going to depend on your unique circumstances and needs. But one thing that I find really helpful is to always make sure that to have the learning materials as easily accessible as possible. You also want to actively block out time. So you're going through a course, and don't just say like, tomorrow I will study for 5 hours. Instead, what you want to do is you want to add your learning sessions to your calendar with a specific start and end time, and then also set some reminders. And the last point is to set reasonable expectations. That's really important because if you aim too high initially with your learning goals, you actually set yourself up for frustration later on. And you can ask yourself, you know, what are maybe some competing interests, commitments, and priorities that I have in my life that I also need to take into account. Now, when it comes to daily practices, at the beginning of your focus sessions, you always want to make sure that you turn off your phone. It's kind of obvious. And to close any apps or browser windows that are not relevant to your learning. And then during your focus sessions, it's a good idea to take intentional breaks based on your learning style. So some people will do better with shorter and more frequent breaks, and other people will do better with longer and maybe less frequent breaks. And then lastly, you can also use some focus enhancing tools. So I listed a few here. I'm sure there's more, but these types of tools let you do things like automatically block distracting apps and websites, create custom background sounds for your learning, and set daily goals for your learning and kind of track how you're doing with respect to those over time. Now that we looked at how to minimize the potential for distraction, the next question becomes how do we deal with it when it actually happens? What does that process look like in the moment? And essentially, it's an endless loop. You start working on a task. At some point, you become distracted. At some point, you will notice the distraction, and then you kind of need to let it go and return your focus to whatever it is that you were working on before. The hard part usually is to notice when you become distracted. And to get better at that over time, you can try asking yourself on a regular basis, is what I'm doing right now still related to my current task? And if the answer is no, it's important to just acknowledge that and not beat yourself up about it. Because if you do, it's actually just another type of distraction. Yeah, so as you go through this process day in and day out, you might notice some distractions that are hard to ignore, but easy to fix. For example, maybe you forgot to turn off your phone and it rings, or maybe you're getting cold because you didn't turn up the heater. And these things are okay to address in the moment. But anything that takes more than a few seconds to address, it's usually a good idea to leave that for later. Outside of your daily learning, it can be a good idea to ask yourself every once in a while, do I get distracted consistently when I'm trying to do focused work? Because if that's the case, you might need to take a step back and reevaluate your strategy, whether it's working for you, and maybe if there are some deeper reasons behind your distraction. And there's a few things that you can look into there. For example, are your study sessions too long, or are they maybe scheduled for the wrong time of day? Does your setup need any additional improvements, or are there maybe distracting factors in your larger environment that you didn't anticipate? So for example, maybe you have people barging in on you all the time and asking you questions, things like that. Are you consistently taking care of your physical needs? So how is your sleep? How is your nutrition? How is your physical activity? And then how interesting or important is the course that you're doing, and is it actually worth completing? Because maybe you get distracted because the course is actually not applicable at the moment, maybe it's even badly presented, or it's just not what you expected. And in that case, it's a good idea to not force yourself to complete the course just because you started it. Maybe there are more important things in your life that you should be taking care of right now. And this also brings us to the last point, which is to kind of revisit your expectations and see if you maybe need to shift your focus to some other things. Now, the strategies that I talked about so far, they're all going to vary a bit on based on your personal circumstances, your needs, and they're going to vary over time. But there's a few, I guess, more universal habits that can help you stay consistent with your learning in the long term. So, for example, to create and maintain momentum, it's a good idea to always notice and celebrate any small wins that you may have, and to also remind yourself of your goals and how all the work that you're doing every day is kind of bringing you closer to them. But one thing that I find quite important is to not wait for motivation, because it's very unreliable, and you know, some days are just going to be a slog, and that's normal, that's okay, as long as you manage to trust in the process and kind of keep showing up every day. good things will will eventually happen. Then when it comes to dealing with setbacks or maybe some difficult parts of a course, it's a good idea to have a growth mindset and to get better at noticing distractions more quickly and letting them go without judging yourself so much. It can be very helpful to do some mindfulness training. And lastly, and we heard about this today, this morning in Paula's talk actually, if all else fails, you can just erase distraction. Because sometimes that can just be a good idea, because if you intentionally shift your focus to something else or even allow your mind to wander a little bit, you might have some really original and unusual ideas. And at the very least, you'll give your brain some space to process the information that you just learned and make some new connections. And that can really help sometimes with mastering tougher subjects. So to sum up, there's many things that we can do to deal with distractions better, but there's no magic formula that's going to work for everyone and at all times. So you need to explore a little bit out what works best for you. And hopefully the points that I touched on will help you a little bit with that. And if you have some questions or strategies to share, I'm happy to talk after. Thanks.
Okay, so since we have only a little bit of time left, if you are in person, I would encourage you to ask questions out in the hall. And if you want to reach out to them on Slack or their emails and other forms of communication that have been provided, please feel free to do that. Thank you. And thanks to all our presenters.